Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're doing well and having a great day so far. It's Wednesday. We're going to do a Rashi from the fourth Aliyah of Parsha Shlach. We get deeper into the details of the punishment of the Chet HaMeraglim, which we started to speak about yesterday. And the Torah introduces us to the concept of the fact that they would be wandering for 40 years in the desert. As the Torah tells us, "Uvnechem yu ro'im bamidbar arba'im shana." The introductory psukim just says they're going to be wandering for 40 years in order to v'nasu et zenusechem atom pigrechem bamidbar. They should bear your betrayal, so to speak, on their shoulders. They should bear their sins, so to speak. It's just the general idea of 40 years, taking 40 years in order to pay off this crime, something like that. The next pasuk gives us more detail, which I think is what normally people would answer if you ask them, why is it 40 years in the desert? B'mispar hayamim asher tartem es haaretz arba'im yom lashana tisu es avonesechem arba'im shana v'yidatem es nuasi. Why is it 40 years? Because it's keneged against the 40 days that the Meraglim sinned in the land. So they went for 40 days to tour the land, and Yom Lashana, 1 year for every day that was spent in the land. They have this punishment where they have to carry their sins with them until they are exonerated for the sins of the Meraglim. So Rashi points on the first pasuk to a very interesting idea about the 40 years in the Midbar, which I think is less known. We usually gravitate towards this more obvious idea that 40 years is against the 40 days they spent touring. But there's another idea to the 40, which I think is very important for us to understand. He says, Arba'im Shana. Why was it 40 years? Lo meis echad mehem pachos mi ben shishim. The 40 years was meant to ensure that no one of this generation would die before they were 60 years old, meaning everybody that died in the 40 years only died at 60 years old and above. In order to make that happen, they needed to spend 40 years in the desert. Because if you remember, the punishment to the Meraglim, the previous psukim over here, was only to those who would be counted b'minyan, who would be counted in the counts, the various counts for the army, for other things in the Jewish people, which is age 20 and above. So if they need to live till age 60, then the youngest of the people at the time of the Chet HaMeraglim were 20, which means they need 40 years span in the Midbar in order to make sure that everyone from 20 and above dies at age 60 and above. If you do the math, that's the calculation. Lakach nigzar arba'im kidei shiyu osan shel b'nei shnas esrim megi'in l'chla shishim. To do the math correctly, you need 40 years to get those who were 20 at the time of the Chet HaMeraglim to be 60 before they die. V'shana rishona haisa bichlal, then you'll argue, well, it's not exactly right because it's actually only 39 extra years. It was a total of 40 years, but we're now in the beginning of year 2. So 39 is really the punishment time. But he points out that the first year becomes incorporated in the count as well. It all becomes subsumed into one large unit of 40 years. And the reason for that is, even though the first year was before Chet HaMeraglim ever occurred, from the time they sinned with the Chet HaEgel, which was the first year, it already came upon the mind of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that they would be punished in some way. As we know, already in Chet HaEgel, Hashem says that he's going to destroy the Jewish people. Moshe says, Mecheni na misifrecha, no, you have to erase me from your book, let them live. Hashem just waited till the problems that were bubbling to the surface in Chet HaEgel came to full fruition in Chet HaMeraglim. But they're all part of one continuum of mistake, and they're all part of one kind of package deal, and therefore the sins are all lumped together, the years are all lumped together. The beginning of the count starts from the first year, 40, not from the second year. And all of this can still calculate out to make sure those who were 20 at the time of Chet HaMeraglim would be able to live until 60. I think there's a little bit of a novel idea here. The idea that Hashem wanted everybody who was being punished, so to speak, to live till age 60, in my mind, it helps me wrap my head around a little bit about what the purpose of this punishment was and the severity of this punishment was. While it seems like an incredibly severe punishment, and it is, these people had left Mitzrayim to go to see the land of Israel. It was the entire promise of leaving, and yet now they weren't going to make it. It was, of course, extremely harsh punishment. But the idea in our mind, I think in my mind, is a little bit different than the way it pans out in the psukim. It's not just like Hashem says, okay, you're all going to die, and now every year people die in the midbar. Really, Hashem allowed these people to live out their life. Living till age 60 in the midbar years was a full life. So he wanted not to cut their lives short, but just to make sure that they wouldn't get into the land of Israel. Was willing to stretch this whole journey out for 40 years in order to make sure that happened. In my mind, in one hand, that's more severe because it stretches out this punishment. On the other hand, it's less severe in the sense that Hashem was not necessarily cutting them off in life. He was just cutting them off from the promise of the land of Israel. I'm sure much to think about. I'll let you mull that over as you go forward as well. Have a great day, everybody. And